You mentioned West High a few minutes ago and kind of how will we judge the Trojans, having only played 3 games but looking really good in those 3 games. And at the controls for the Trojans is senior quarterback Marcus Morgan. Good year for quarterbacks in this state. Is this kid the best there is?
I like that we start this podcast and that's what we come up firing with, right? It's like, let's get into a good debate where everybody can tell me how wrong I am.
And it's interesting too, because you sent me that, or we talked about talking about this topic last night, kind of what some items that we could talk about. And I saw on Twitter today that somebody else had the same idea and listed the quarterbacks in the state by quarterback ranking through 6 weeks. And Marcus leads everybody with a 153 quarterback ranking. He's about 3.5 points up on Jackson Daly from Southeast Polk. And then you have right behind him, Jace Bauer from Ankeny. And I think you could argue that those are 3 of the best teams in the state.
Right. And that's when I did my prep, those are the 2 that I think most people know about, aside from Marcus, obviously, who I cover, but is Daly and Bauer. And then, of course, and help me, I'm totally blanking on this. The Iowa commit from OABCIG, who just has phenomenal statistics, that plays quarterback for them.
Yeah, Cooper DeJean, who he's going to play safety in high school, so I don't think people look at him as a quarterback. But they should, because he's putting up video game numbers.
Yes, I mean, you have to throw you said it well. You have to throw him in that because the stats he has and he's certainly, I've seen him do all sports. He's certainly a phenomenal athlete.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, if you haven't seen that kid play basketball, just search videos of him dunking a basketball. He's only like 6'1". It's impressive.
But those 3 guys, especially playing at the highest level in the state, no knock on any other class, obviously, but playing at the highest level, which, I mean, 4A football in this state is very good. Those 3 guys, and I sent you that, and I was like, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, I'm going to say that Marcus is the best. Like, I cover West High. I've had the chance to watch his last 2 games. And I knew he was a very good player. He's been great the last 2 years. Kind of took over that job full-time a couple games into his sophomore year. But I think you can make not just a case, but a strong case, Rob, that he's the most impactful player in the state, any position. I really do. And the reason is, like, he checks all the boxes, as far as you talk to coaches, especially about quarterbacks, and they're going to talk about the intangibles. I'm not going to go into that. I'm not at practice every day. I really, really enjoy talking to him, covering him. He's a really insightful kid. If you ask him a question and he doesn't agree with you about it, he'll be like, nah, I don't think so. This is what I saw. He's really insightful. Always enjoy talking to him. But the coaches say, he has all the intangibles. When I see it, he's a winner. He's a leader, et cetera. But and this is my novice football brain, but what he brings that I think makes him so impactful on offense, he's noticeably bigger this year. He can run. He can escape. He's one of the best high school quarterbacks I've ever seen at scrambling to throw. Most kids, when they get out of the pocket, they're scrambling to run. He really keeps his eyes downfield, does a great job of that. Some of that stuff that you can't really coach. Kids kind of have that. But his arm talent, his arm strength, you have an entire playbook that you can run. And that's the thing with high school football is, you play to your quarterback strengths, and at all levels what having a difference maker at that position does. Yeah. And he's a difference maker. But it's just the idea that you can be on one hash mark and every route in the route tree all over the field is available to you as offensive coordinator because he has that type of arm strength. I mean, where you want to run out to the opposite hash mark, he'll put it on the money right as the guy turns around. There's just not that many high school quarterbacks that physically can do that. I mean, he throws a baseball 90 miles an hour. He's a college baseball prospect, obviously, maybe a professional baseball player. So he has that, but I'm a huge stat guy, and I'm not going to muddle up our podcast all the time with stats, I promise.
Bring the numbers. But we need statistical backup here.
I looked this up because I thought this one was super interesting. This includes incomplete passes. So this includes incomplete passes. On plays that they run that end that with Marcus Morgan throwing a pass or running the football.
Okay.
So offensive snaps in which he throws a pass or runs the football, West High averages 9.7 yards per play.
Wow.
And that
That's
includes
good. That's pretty good.
So I mean,
I think
he's thrown for
good.
I mean, you think about that, and I just thought about it, how many big plays he's had running and passing. His game against Senior the other day, he was 12 of 23, I think, which knocked his completion percentage way down because he was 13 of 14 against City High, which I thought was the best high school performance by a high school quarterback I'd seen in a long time. But against Senior the other day, they hadn't practiced, and they could get together. They hadn't been able to have official practice with coaches for 3 weeks. And that team, Senior is very good. They're a top 10 team. And he came out and threw for 230 yards and 3 touchdowns, ran for 71 yards and a touchdown, and had 2 interceptions and returned one of them 50 yards for a touchdown.
Yeah, he's playing defense too, right? Does he play safety?
Yep. And that's when I said the most impactful. I know there's a ton of kids that play both ways. Not as many in 4A, but there's a lot. Mm-hmm. Gable Mitchell at City High is on the field for every single snap. He's another kid that's super impactful. But Marcus plays a really good safety, and they use him there now. And he's kind of that true old school safety. Like, they don't want him up in the box for 50 defensive plays, I don't think, considering how valuable he is. But he's a really good tackler. He really breaks on the ball. Not the one that the pick six he had was a tip pass, but he had one at the end of the half, last play of the half, where he backpedaled, stuck his foot in the ground, and made a really nice break on the ball. And then he punts. And, I'm sure they'd love to have him return kicks and everything, but he averages over 40 yards a punt, and he's a really good directional kicker. And when you worry about in high school when you're trying to do some directional kicking with having that, 12-yarder off the side of the foot and some of that stuff, he hasn't had one of those. He had a 62-yarder the other day that, wasn't all balanced when they were backed up to about their 10, only up by, 1 touchdown that really flipped field position. He's just a super talented kid, which is why he, is a 4-sport athlete at the highest level in the state. But I think you can make a really good case that he has more of an impact on the game than any other player in the state. And as you said, there's really good quarterbacks in the state too, and a bunch of really good players too. But he impacts the game, in 85, 90% of the plays that happen in the game. He's out there a lot and has a big impact.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate for him and, other kids in this 2021 class, with the recruiting dead period that's pretty much run since the beginning of this pandemic in March and goes through the end of this year. I think had that not happened, and if he were right now able to take visits like normal, I think we'd hear a lot more recruiting hype about him. I
do too. And it's just going to be really interesting to see what that young man decides to do, because again, he's so talented, and he's such a good, I've talked to a lot of people about him in baseball, and then especially this year for baseball, you saw it even in the major leagues with how guys dealt with pitchers. He's not a hitter, so you can't. He is a hitter. He's actually a good hitter. I saw him hit a home run at Liberty this year. He's just such a talented kid. Yeah. He makes it look really easy, but his future is pitching. Well, when you have a pandemic and you don't just throw a guy out there and be like, all right, give us 7 innings today when he's got the type of future that he does. And I just don't think he ever got into a rhythm this summer pitching the way that they wanted him to. And you want to be careful. You're never going to risk anything with his arm and how he felt. And I still saw him be very good a couple of times this summer, but he has a bright future. I think, again, as I said, I think he's as good as he is. I think he's, like you said, I think he's maybe underrated. I don't want to say underrated from a recruiting aspect, but he's playing football at such an incredibly high level right now, much higher. And then again, he starts out great. They have 3 weeks off, right. And so you look at his stats and all those things, and it was already going to be a 7-game season or whatever instead of 9. So when you look back in the stat books, it won't pop, but he is playing football at such an incredibly high level. I'd like to see him, if he had a year to just play football, to see what type of quarterback. The stuff that they can do with him in the RPO game is, he's a nightmare to try to defend the way he runs that, and he's really good at reading that stuff too. and kind of rides that handoff to the tailback. And he has a good set of receivers too. You have to give those kids credit. Graham Goring, and he's got some Demario Williams. He's got some really good receivers, but he provides a different element to a high school offense than what I've seen a quarterback provide in a long time, maybe ever, of me doing this, which is only 15, 20 years or whatever. But he's a difference maker.
You convinced me. He's the best quarterback in the state.
There we go. We're coming out hot right away, right off the bat, Rob.
Let's move on to number 2 in the 7 Nation podcast, which would be City High. Tough game at Linn-Mar last week, fell 50-36. They finished, and we should mention, West has a difficult game against Kennedy this week. We'll get into the previewing those games, but we'll just mention who these teams play this week. Iowa City battle this week with our second subject here, City High. They play Liberty, and important game. I mean, 1-2 and going into this week, Ryan. Why is this such an important week for City High?
I think it's huge, and I really do, because talking to the people at City High before the season, after the West game, that was just kind of I don't want to say the worst, but that's a bad time to have to sit for 3 weeks, because they really feel like they've been 2-7 the last 3 years prior to this year, and they really feel like that they were much improved this year. And I've only seen them once. I saw them in that West High game, and I see what they're talking about. They're a much better football team than what they have been. They really are. I like their. Other
than Hamilton, the quarterback, and some other players, they're pretty young still, aren't they?
They're very young. No, a lot of those guys kind of got tossed out there last year. A lot of their linemen, but they've got some size up front. They've got some guys at the skill positions. Gable Mitchell's a really good player. Jamari Newsom didn't play against Linn-Mar, but he's a good running back. They've got some other guys that in the past game. Colby Kutra, he's a senior, but he's a nice tight end. He's a big target.
He lives.
I really like. He's a great kid. They go to our church. He's awesome. But absolutely.
Sorry,
he's a good target.
I messed up your train of thought.
No, he's a good target. I think they're much improved. And you look at the way the season plays out for them. It stinks for all the Iowa City schools, when you miss 3 games.
Right.
But I think for them it came at a bad time. You're coming off that loss, because I think that Linn-Mar is a winnable game for them. Linn-Mar had to sit for their own, COVID. They had to sit for COVID. Mm-hmm. But they got back and they had a game, that Saturday previous. They played at Prairie. And Prairie got them pretty good, but you've seen that a lot in college. These teams that have had a game, after a layoff, or had a game at the start of the year, it's kind of goofy how much different they look.
You mean like a team that might have played like Louisiana?
Well, I know you're giving me a hard, but look at that.
No, but I mean, they lost to Louisiana at home and now have beaten, we're talking about Iowa State, obviously, but then they go and win at TCU.
Exactly.
Wins at Texas.
Exactly.
Beat Oklahoma.
And TCU is a good example of that too. They're playing their first game against Iowa State. Right. They're trying to figure everything out. Then look how they looked on Saturday. Totally different looking team.
Yeah.
As an Iowa State fan, I'll take the fact that they looked, not so great their first game. But I think Linn-Mar came back from that layoff, shook off a little bit. You're getting hit again, all that stuff. And I think that's a really winnable game for City High that they happen to have after 3 weeks. And they were practicing, and I really commend all those kids and all those people in that situation. They had people step up and trying to, help get these kids to practice and continue doing something for 3 weeks. They weren't sitting on their couches. But it's a layoff. They hadn't played a game in 3 weeks, and so they lose that one. I just think this week is huge for them, because I think they can win games, plural, in the playoffs with the right draw. I really do. But 2-2 feels a lot different than 1-3. And especially when your one win was your first week, that was August, and you're going to play a playoff game in the middle of October. Man, it feels like you haven't won a football game for years, I'm sure. That first win probably feels a long time ago. So, and Liberty's saying the same thing, but